second chapter of the second book of Samuel records a moment in time when everything changed for David. He had an important decision to make, and so David turned to God, looking for guidance, and asked which way he should go. For many years, David had been hiding from Saul, pursued by him at every turn. He and his men had taken refuge among the Philistines in a place called Ziklag, near the border of Judea. It was in Ziklag that David learned about the fate of Saul and Jonathan, who had died in battle against the Philistines. There was no rejoicing on the part of David at the death of his rival, only sorrow. In their struggle for the throne, David had always refused at every opportunity he had to kill Saul. And of course, Jonathan, Saul's son, had always been his friend. How the mighty have fallen in battle, David cried. For a time, they all grieved. But then it was time to make a decision. What should they do now? Where should they go? David inquired of the Lord, so we are told. We might think of this as prayer, but the method David used was a little different and likely involved the use of Urim and Thummim in a process of divination. The term for this is kleromancy, the casting of lots, in which an outcome is determined by means that normally would be considered random, such as the rolling of dice, believed to reveal the will of God or other universal forces or entities. Urim and Thummim are the dice in this case, mystical objects, gemstones perhaps, worn by the high priest and consulted whenever they wanted to know the will of God. The origin of these two words is unclear, but many translate it to mean lights and perfection. Later on, the early church thought of them more metaphorically as revelation and truth, spiritual gemstones that still guide us today. The Urim and Thummim were hidden in or part of a breastplate that was worn by the high priest. In most cases, when they were used, a simple yes or no question was asked, and a clear, or maybe not so clear answer was then divined from the outcome. In other words, it was the ancient version of the magic 8-ball. Ask your question, should I do this? And an answer will be provided. Yes, definitely. Or my sources say no, or ask again later. The original 8-ball had 10 positive, 5 negative, and 5 neutral answers. And yet, almost every time I played with one, it just said, ask again later. So I am surprised that David could divine any clear answers at all from such a process. Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? David asked. The Lord said, go up. David asked, where shall I go? To Hebron, the Lord answered. The latter was not strictly a yes or no answer, but it was probably divined by asking repeatedly whether they should go here or there, until eventually the answer was Hebron. Going to Hebron turned out to be a wise choice. David chose not to enter into Judah claiming to be their king, but soon the men of Judah came and made him so. God, of course, had anointed King David a long time ago, but he waited for people to acknowledge that rather than insisting that they treat him as such. He also refused to speak evil of Saul, even after his death. To those who had buried Saul, he said, the Lord bless you for showing this kindness to Saul, your master, by burying him. May the Lord now show you kindness and faithfulness, and I too will show you the same favor, because you have done this. Now then, be strong and brave, for Saul your master is dead, and the people of Judah have anointed me king over them. For 7.5 years, David was king, but only over Judah, with his capital located in Hebron. In northern Israel, another son of Saul, Ishbosheth, was named king. When Ishi died a few years later, Israel needed God's help in their struggle with the Philistines. Therefore, the elders of Israel came to Hebron and anointed David king over all of Israel as well. And the kingdom was united once again. David then conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital. The ark was brought to Jerusalem, and the rest, as they say, is history. One of the keys to David's success was certainly that David inquired of the Lord. No doubt in a variety of ways, always seeking God's guidance. He did so because he wanted God's plan for him to also be his plan as well. Here I must confess that I am not really comfortable with the idea of making such decisions based upon random chance. I know that David certainly wasn't the last person to do this. In fact, even today, people still flip a coin or use some other random means to decide whatever may be for them, a minor or even a major choice. I just think that to do that means either that any choice will do, or it assumes that God somehow determines the outcome. I am reluctant to believe that every random thing that happens is the result of God's intervention. Einstein famously said once that God does not play dice with the universe, in reference to the ideas proposed by quantum physics. And then later, he seemed to contradict himself, or at least modify that, by saying that actually, God tirelessly plays dice under laws which he has himself prescribed. If that is so, then while there is some randomness to it all, there is also some order to be found in the universe, an order established by God. Everything that I have learned also suggests that there are both physical and moral laws that govern this universe. Both determine the course of life for us. If the universe has truly been set up that way by God, then our life is not random at all, because we have a role to play in the outcome. Simply put, step off of a building and you will fall, and there will be consequences. That is a consequence of natural law. Step over the line morally, and even if the consequences are not immediately apparent, there will still be consequences eventually. Your word is a lamp for my feet, a light on my path, it says in the book of Psalms. The promise implies that we will be able to see the next step in our journey just by shining God's light on the pathway that is right before us. I have long believed that principle should create the path we take, or at the very least determine the path that we will not take. Therefore, once we have decided to do what is right, the pathway we need to take will become clear to us. I refuse to believe that human choice should be removed from the life equation. If we do that, then the future just happens to us. Instead, I believe that we create that future. And the best way to do that is to allow God to guide us. As Micah said, he has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. To fear the name of the Lord is wisdom, he added. Heed the rod and the one who appointed it. In most cases, the choice we need to make is just to do what is right and then trust God with the outcome. No dice are required. Thomas Merton was a Catholic priest born in 1915 who spent 27 years of his life in the Abbey of Gethsemane, a community of Trappist monks. At first, he wrote books on monastic spirituality and was praised and highly regarded by others. Then, late in his life, his writing changed. He became a strong supporter of the nonviolent civil rights movement, which he called certainly the greatest example of Christian faith in action in the social history of the United States. He described race and peace as the two most urgent issues of our time. Catholics and non-Catholics alike then assailed his political writings as unbecoming of a monk. Those at the forefront of that movement, however, saw him as the conscience of the peace movement of the 1960s. It was during this time that he wrote what is now called the Merton Prayer. It captures well the angst of a soul that is seeking God's guidance and answers it with the faith to believe that God will always guide us. My Lord, I have no idea where I am going, he wrote, I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost, and in the shadow of death, I will not fear. For you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. I sometimes wish that knowing what God wanted me to do was still as easy as rolling the dice. Since that is no longer true, however, all I can do is pray for God to guide me. God knows my desire to do what does in fact please God. So I know that whatever choice I make in faith and whatever that pathway leads me, God will be there too. Be safe, and God bless you.